Hello, my name is Kelly Vaillancourt Strobach. I am the Director of NASP Policy and Advocacy, and welcome to the next installment of our Ask the Experts webinar series. Today we are focused on strategies for engaging and supporting parents during the pandemic. We flip the slide, please. So just as a reminder, we are doing a series of these webinars that will be posted on the NASP website. These webinars are intended to offer support to school psychologists, interns, and practicum students as we all navigate the delivery of school psychological services during the COVID-19 pandemic. Each webinar is going to be followed by a discussion thread on the NASP member exchange in the community. So I encourage you to head over there after you've watched this webinar to engage with your colleagues on issues that arise from this topic on how we can best support parents, as well as the other topics in the webinar series that we have presented. Each webinar is intended to address some critical questions that have been emerging as the result of our need to provide virtual telehealth and school psychological services. We want to provide you with some advice and guidance from our experts and offer suggested strategies and resources for addressing professional practice issues. Can you get to the next slide, please? So I would like to introduce to you our amazing panel of experts today. First of all, we have Shawna Rader Kelly, who is a school psychologist for the Bozeman Public Schools in Montana, where she serves as a school psychologist at Bozeman High School. Shawna is also an educational consultant for the Montana Office of Public Instruction, where she provides training and consultation to schools implementing multi-tiered systems of support. She's also the 2017 NASP School Psychologist of the Year and currently serves on our board of directors as a strategic liaison. We have Libby Kuffner Nealis, who is a policy consultant as well as a parent. Libby routinely consults on issues of student support and special education services. She has worked as a legislative assistant in Congress and has represented school-based mental health professionals. Pro tip for you NASP members out there, she used to work for NASP a long time ago, and has also worked at the School Social Work Association of America. As a parent of a teenage daughter with cerebral palsy, Libby works with her school district and PTA to support inclusive education and assist fellow parents with resources and support. We also have Chandrai Saunders. She is a school psychologist in the DC public school system. She is NASP's 2020 School Psychologist of the Year, and for over 30 years, she has provided services to kindergarten through high school students, staff, and families. She is recognized for her innovative approach to addressing the difficulties associated with school or home life that require the support and resources necessary to overcome academic and social emotional struggles. And we are also joined by Helen Westmoreland, who is the Director of Family Engagement at the National PTA, where she leads PTA's efforts to empower parent leaders to be champions for transformative family engagement. Prior to being at PTA, Helen was the Deputy Director at Flamboyant Foundation, where she co-developed their family engagement strategy, and previously she worked at the Harvard Family Research Project with community-based after-school programs. She has provided consulting services and authored publications on family engagement, education organizing, out-of-school time, and scaling impact. Thank you guys all so much for being here with us and taking valuable time out of your day to join us and share this great information with our members. So if you feel, flip the slide, please. So Helen, I want to start with you and just jump right in with our questions. And what are you hearing from parents about their struggles adjusting to the school closures?
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much for having me, Kelly. It's a real honor to be here with the National Association of School Psychologists. We are hearing that it's a struggle, right? So that's the headline. And there are a few sort of themes that are emerging from some of the research we've been doing in the field and our conversations with parents across the country. The first, which has really evolved very quickly over the past few weeks, is how families can talk to their children about the pandemic. So everything from, what do I say if my kid is asking why they can't have prom, to my little young child wants to play with their friends and they now can't. And so, we encourage them as National PTA to have, fact-based, age-appropriate conversations with their children. But this is a struggle and will probably continue to be a struggle. The second major thing we're hearing about is just real challenges with the nuts and bolts of remote learning, particularly with families who have children that have received modifications or individualized education programs. So everything from technology needs, so not all families, as we all know, necessarily have access to laptops or Chromebooks or Wi-Fi, particularly if they're a family with multiple children. And then just balancing all of that. Some districts are providing very clear guidance on remote learning, others are not. So families are sort of wondering, like, how much do I do? What do I do? We know most families are really, really stretched right now in a lot of ways. And so we want to just encourage them to do their best and make the most of what they have. But families are wondering not only just about that remote learning, but how long schools will be closed. The third major thing we are hearing, and particularly now as we're entering in some communities week 2, 3, 4, even of school closures, is just how to support sort of the overall social and emotional well-being, good behavior management of children who are starting to be a little stir crazy, right? And families who are suddenly thrust into the role of teachers and coaches and everything else on top of the normal parenting duties that they have, and on top, for many families, of balancing working remotely or working in an essential job or a job they need to keep to pay the bills, and just worrying about how to make sure their kids are staying out of trouble, how to make sure they're learning, all of those things. And then the last big thing we're hearing from families is honestly just about some real gaps in our social infrastructure around basic needs. So families are worried about jobs. They're worried about childcare. They're worried about food security, because for many families, the main way their children eat nutritious meals during the day was through school. So there are a lot of challenges families are experiencing right now, and we are expecting that those challenges will probably continue for a number more weeks, if not months.
Great, thank you. And I imagine that Shawna and Chandrai are going to have some good advice on how we can talk to parents and families about a lot of the issues that you just raised. Libby, I want to go to you next with our next question. And as the parent of a child with a disability, what do you think other parents like yourself are most concerned about or are struggling with?
Well, I've actually heard from a number of parents, both those with students with disabilities and without, and depending on your school district and how quickly they've been able to roll out whatever academic plan they're going to put forward, just like we were hearing, there's a lot of needs they had to take care of first. I know in our school district, getting them the food, making sure everybody had the laptops, that seemed to be the first priority, rightfully so. So they're just now rolling out the academics, and I know that parents are very concerned about what are their needs going to be? How are they going to continue to meet the goals on their IEP? What if they had services that they were getting before, and now they're not getting them? Not to mention if the parent's home with the student now, depending obviously on the needs of the child and the issues, there may be behavior challenges going on. I can imagine that's adding to the struggles and the anxieties at home. So I think school psychologists have an opportunity to be the liaison between the school and the parents and students that they know have IEPs. And if they're not working with the students that have 504 plans, work with those other professionals on their team, but to be a liaison, to understand that there's a lot of questions, a lot of uncertainty, and that they, if they already have a relationship with some of these students and parents, that would be a great opportunity for them to reach out and appease, mitigate some of their concerns and let them know that there should be plans coming forward soon. I think another thing that parents are starting to grapple with is just addressing the social and emotional issues of their children, because everybody's kind of dealing with this collective trauma together. And how much longer will school go on? If their student has lagged behind and there's been a couple of weeks going already. Will there be extended services in the summer, perhaps? I know there's still a lot to figure out, but yes, the parents of students are grappling with this for sure.
Great, thank you. So we've heard, from our parents, and I want to now turn to our school psychologist experts to start to get some advice and kind of dig into some of the struggles and the issues that both Helen and Libby just raised. So Shawna, I want to start with you and would love to get your thoughts on how school psychologists can adapt their services. I mean, we're used to working in school buildings, kind of in person, face to face with our families and teachers and students and communities. And so how can they adapt their services to meet the needs of children and families given the context that we're currently operating in?
Thanks, Kelly. This is a great question. I think it highlights our need to be flexible and responsive to our service delivery in these changing times. I think we start by thinking about what parents and families need to know to best support their children, and then ask ourselves what we can do to be a resource for them. School psychologists have significant expertise in areas of consultation and collaboration, and I think we can leverage our expertise in those areas to support parents and families. Teachers and school leadership teams will need our expertise and support more than ever, but we can also ensure that we're expanding, or in some cases increasing, those supports to parents and families and providing them with that same sort of consultation and collaboration that we would typically lend to our school teams. For many of us, we're providing both direct and indirect services to students on a daily basis, and I think what we have to do at this point is brainstorm ways to adapt those services during the school closures. So in some cases, we may be able to continue our direct services to students. We may be able to work with them remotely in a virtual capacity. And I think NASP has provided a number of excellent resources that will help school psychologists to adapt those mental and behavioral health supports that they might be providing to a virtual format. We can offer those check-ins and counseling services remotely. But in other cases, I think it may be more important to think about how we adapt those services to provide more supports for parents and families, because they're finding themselves on the front line of delivering and managing and monitoring the instructional world for their students. So, I mean, this might include, first and foremost, connecting parents to resources, either at the school or community level, but also helping parents to just establish flexible routines that promote a good balance between schoolwork and virtual social time and family time and activities, and also self-care. We know that those kinds of routines can help to be stabilizing factors for kids during these uncertain times, and we can help to extend that expertise and to support parents in implementing some of those routines for their kids. I think we've heard how stressful this can be for parents, and so I think just providing some of that assurance, but also some of those recommendations to help them make this transition to what could be a new normal for many families for a significant amount of time. I think one of the most important things we can do is promote resiliency and talk to parents about how they can promote resiliency in their children, how they manage setbacks, maybe how they implement components of a behavior plan or a reward system that's been successful at school, and how they can adapt that to the home setting, but also how they can prompt and reinforce the skills that we might be teaching through either our universal or our tiered positive behavior supports and social emotional learning frameworks. Personally, I've been thinking a lot about how we support teachers and reflecting on how we can adapt those techniques to provide support for parents. So for example, we may have a really robust MTSS or problem-solving system in place that teachers can readily access to seek support when they have questions about how to provide interventions or supports for kids. But right now, if parents are playing a larger role in monitoring and managing a child's school day, we can think about ways that we can extend those supports to them. So maybe we brainstorm ways to ensure that those critical components of our existing structures continue to work not only for our staff, who are hopefully continuing to engage with their students, but are also available to parents too. So maybe thinking about ways that parents can communicate if they see that their children are struggling or if they have concerns, so that we can ensure that they have that access point for receiving assistance in this new virtual format that we're all learning to navigate. in many cases, I think school psychologists have established relationships with children and their families. So perhaps most importantly, we can be proactive and just reaching out to them to start these conversations as opposed to waiting them to come to us. I think many families are overwhelmed. So to the extent that we can do our best to reach out and engage them and let them know that we're here to be a support for them and that we're here to be a liaison for them to the school community, I think that can be one of the best ways that we can adapt that skill set that we have to working with parents and families in this time.
Great, thank you. That is excellent advice for our school psychologists. And I want to pick up on a point that you made and turn to Chandrai, is that, you know, a lot of our students are struggling with mental health needs and are wondering how now that we're not going to school every day and they've not lost the connection with a school psychologist, but they've lost that physical connection. What are some ways that school psychologists can support parents in responding to the mental health needs of their kids, especially when, you know, the stress of this situation is likely also causing some of our parents to struggle with their own mental health? So Chandrai, I would love to know your thoughts on what school psychologists can do to help support mental health during this time.
Thank you for the question. Very, very important. And I want to echo something that Shawna says that kind of stands out for me specifically, and for a lot of my colleagues I know. Being proactive as opposed to reactive is probably the key here. And it's interesting, I advocate prevention and being proactive as opposed to reactive in a time of crisis. Well, look where we find ourselves at this moment. But one of the things I've learned is that even in a time of crisis, it's an absolute excellent opportunity, especially for school psychologists who have the tools, have the resources, and know really what to do, to take leadership, to take more responsibility and not less, to be responsive to our parents, our students, and our staff. And so particularly for parents, let's communicate with them. Let's talk with parents. Let's reach out to them. Let's be a support in helping them understand, most importantly, they are not alone. And, you know, we make light of that by trying to reassure and ensure, but it is extremely important that our parents know that they are not in this by themselves, that they have a partner, and our partnership doesn't end at 3 o'clock. As we well know, the role of our school psychologist is almost 24/7, and it's important that our parents know that as well. Something else that's important is that we have to help our parents, and as we communicate with them and get to know a little bit more about their struggles and what's going on, be able to help them connect to those mental health resources that they may need. And there's a wealth of information out there about how to do just that. NASP is kind of leading the way in terms of resources that we could be able to provide our parents so that they understand that there is access, there is support for what they're dealing with. And guess what? That just because we are isolated and practicing this social distancing, that we can still access those services, those mental health services, either through helping their kids use the telepathic health platforms that are available, reaching out and connecting teachers and families to the students and families to their teachers. Sometimes just having that normalcy, knowing that they can talk to and interact with the teachers and the school support services that they tap into daily is of help to them. What we have been able to do, and what I encourage our school psychologists to do, is to keep those check-ins going. We all know those students in our schools who may need something special, may need more help, may have those social emotional needs that are kind of going unchecked and unattended to during this critical time. Keeping our check-ins going with our students, providing those video conferencing services in a protected format, of course, is, I think, essential and certainly recommended, highly recommended that we continue. I mentioned the NASP website, and I have actually found a vast amount of handouts and resources that I've actually linked on our school website and database management systems that parents can access. Our PBI system that we use, Class Dojo, it's an opportunity for me to post information that parents might be able to access because they're used to accessing Dojo. So I'm not asking them to do anything differently. It's something that they're used to, something that they know how to do, and that they're able to do it without any interruption in their daily routines. The one thing that is important, I think, and I've talked to parents a lot about this, and I'm absolutely recommending that our school psychs do the same, is that this is a time, especially when our families, our students, our most vulnerable populations deal with stress and anxiety. It's kind of normal. I mean, we are dealing with a lot of anxiety, even if it comes to learning new technology that we didn't access before, these critical times. And so making sure that our parents are aware of the warning signs of anxiety and of stress and even of depression, making handouts available to our parents, whether it's by email or on those platforms that they're used to using. It's important that they understand, and Shawna talked about this, the balance of work and school life. We have a lot of parents who want to make sure that their kids don't get disengaged, that they don't get unconnected and disconnected from the routines of what school is like. Well, we want to also talk to them about this is not a normal time. And so we can't expect them to stay engaged 6 and 5 hours a day in math and in reading. It's just not going to happen. And not to put that kind of pressure on themselves or on their children. And so there's a balance between family time. There's a balance between play time. There's a balance in terms of the technology, keeping routines in place for students who respond best to routines is important. Helping them set up those visual schedules that we do anyway when we're in a classroom environment. Right now is a time for us to connect our parents with those SEL skills so that they can learn what they're about and really put them in practice. And so there's a plethora of information that's available to us. We don't have to create the wheel. Just use the resources in front of us, connect our parents to that, and find out what's going on with our parents in their homes and be able to help them access those things.
Wonderful, thank you. I think that a common theme that is starting to emerge is the importance of collaboration and just open communication between schools and families and communities as we all try to figure out what this new reality is. So Helen, I'd like to go back to you, and I'm curious if there are any good examples that you have heard of schools, communities, and PTAs working together and how school psychologists can support these efforts.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, one thing I'd start with is Bottle, our 2 other wonderful experts on this line. And I want to bring you, Chandrai and Shawna, to every family and every household in the country. So one of the best practices that we recommend that schools that are really prioritizing family and community engagement are doing, not even in times of crisis, is what we call sort of an engagement equity map. So like you might with students, look through as a staff and say, who is in touch with this family, whether that's a grandparent or a sibling? What do we know about them? How are they doing? Has anyone checked in with them? And then really start to look at who are the families we haven't yet connected with? What is our plan for how we can connect with them? And I think school psychologists are really poised, if those structures don't already exist, to help really raise that issue in their school community. And that virtual meeting can happen. And as I mentioned, and I think our other panelists really talked about, that being proactive and relational is really important. So sometimes parents want information. Sometimes they just want to have somebody ask, are you okay? How are you doing? How can I support you? And so those sort of informal and relational touch points are just as important now because families are getting a lot of information, sometimes in multiple formats from multiple people. And so don't assume they might not have it yet, because sometimes they may be experiencing some sense of overwhelm. Some families might not have heard anything at all. So that touch point is really, really important. And we have been starting to track some efforts for how PTAs, schools, school psychologists, and communities are working together. I'd love for folks to check out pta.org COVID-19. We've got some curated resources there for families that you can use around many of the issues I talked about earlier that we know families are experiencing now. We're also, over the next several weeks, going to be sharing a little bit more about what some PTAs are doing. So just today, I learned about a great PTA in Montgomery County who is collaborating with their school district, who was having some difficulties getting their food distribution to families who need it most, particularly thinking about that they might not just be feeding individual kids, but sometimes siblings or parents, and maybe dinner was needed. So they are partnering up with the PTA to really extend the services of some of the new food distribution that's happening. We're also hearing about PTAs doing community walks. As Chandrai mentioned, some of these socio-emotional skills and outlets are really hard to develop and hard to come by at the moment. And so one thing PTAs are doing is they might go and distribute little bags of chalk or things people can put in the windows so that community connectivity can continue to happen even in this non-physically together world. So I think school psychologists can reach out. If you don't have a PTA and want to start one, you can go to pta.org and check out some resources there. If you do have a PTA, reach out to them, ask them what they're doing, ask them how you could be plugged in, what they're learning, how you could help. I really think all of those things would just go a really long way, because one of the things we worry about, as I'm sure many folks listening do, is what this is going to feel like in a number of weeks or even months. We're worried about, will there be more child abuse? Will there be domestic violence incidences? So some of these tips that my fellow panelists have shared about just helping keep a handle on stress and anxiety and keep that dialogue going as a school community, where you might be used to really talking about how are children doing and how are they progressing in their plans, really extending that to families and triaging to see how you can be in touch with them as a school community is huge.
Great, thank you. I want to turn back to our school psychologists on the panel. So Chandrai and Shawna, as school psychologists, what do you think are the most important roles that you play in supporting parents in the pandemic?
So one of the things, thanks. One of the things I've learned and I think is important here is that, this is an opportunity to distinguish ourselves as school psychologists to be the true leaders that we are. In times of crises, it's leaders who do what others don't or won't do. And so this is a great moment for us, even in the midst of all this uncertainty, is to kind of stand up and stand out and help our schools, lead them through this difficult time as we advocate, as we always have, for our children, our students, our families, and our staff. One thing that Helen mentioned that is so critical in terms of our role, we spend a lot of time talking about reading and math. That's absolutely correct. But even in terms of making sure that our students have the technology, whether it's hardware, Wi-Fi, or just hotspots, whatever they need in order to stay connected. We have had the opportunity to go to classroom by classroom, student by student, and we know what students don't have access, what they need, and it's our role to make sure that they get what they need, to use our resources and our advocacy to make sure students have what it is they need in order to continue to grow and develop academically, socially, emotionally. And so what that means is that those students who are struggling the most, as RTI leads, we kind of know those kids who we had on our radar. Our voice elevates their concern for our parents. We make sure that those students who are the most vulnerable, who need the most amount of services at this time, in order to continue to be able to close that gap that they have, that they're on the top of the list if they need certain essentials in order to get through this very difficult time. And so I think that making sure that our parents know that we are still their voice, we are still advocating on their behalf for our students, making sure we know what students need and making sure that that need is fulfilled. It's also, it's interesting in our DMV area, we're very close, Maryland, Virginia, DC. And so the travel lines are easy to cross. But we have some families that because the mom is in the health related field and may have to be on duty for 3 and 4 shifts at a time, the child has had to go live with the father. And so that mom is disconnected from that child, not knowing whether or not the assignments are being done. I mean, these are real life situations that kind of play out, that when we're with kids every day, we're able to kind of manage and see and help make it okay. But when we're distanced like this, it's harder to do. Harder, but not impossible. And so whether or not we know a student is not engaged with their classroom teacher for more than twice, 2 days out of that week, it's our job to check on that student, making sure that they stay connected, making sure that they're okay. That's a way we help a parent know that their child is okay when they can't do that for them. We've had a student who's had to be hospitalized, and making sure that that parent who cannot even visit her child, it still feels that she has a role to play in her child's development, both medically as well as academically, as well as socially. So those are ways that we continue to step up, making sure RTI plans are still happening as best they can in this virtual and remote world we're living in. These things don't stop because we're in this difficult situation. School psychologists can make sure that teachers know what to do, that parents know how to make sure their students are available for that engagement, and that we're charting that progress monitoring data still to continue the engagement. Who knows when we're going to return to school? But at least we know that when we get back to see each other face to face, our kids aren't facing a greater divide than they had when they left us. That, I think, is the most important role that we can play for and with our parents at this critical time.
Great, thank you. Shawna, is there anything that you would like to add to that?
Well, I would just like to echo what Chandrai said about the need for advocacy. And I think that's one of our most important roles, not only during these unique times, but in whatever circumstances we find ourselves in. I think our most important role is advocating for kids. And as school leaders and as systems level leaders, school psychologists can advocate for those policies and practices that are both evidence-based, but also student-centered. And in whatever our unique position may be in the settings in which we work, I think we can help to ensure that the decisions that are being made in the best interests of all students, and that we're making those decisions through that lens of both inclusion and equity, so that we ensure that all of our students benefit from the tremendous efforts, and I want to underscore that, the tremendous efforts that I see teachers and educators engaged in right now to transform learning for students. As they're engaged in that work, we can lend our expertise in ensuring that those efforts are available and beneficial to all of the students that we work with and that we serve in our communities. And that those are also focused on the needs of parents and families as well. I think, like, personally for myself, working at the secondary level, I'm thinking about my role in helping to not only engage students academically, but also socially, and in ensuring that they continue to seek and find those connections to their school community and to our community writ large. Empowering them to seek supports when they need them, but also empowering them to contribute in whatever way they can to try to stay connected in their world. And I just think it's really important that we stay proactive and vigilant in our efforts. And I appreciate the real world examples that Chandrai is providing, and the understanding that things can change so rapidly for a student and family. And we need to recognize that every day is a new day that brings maybe unique challenges to a family, and a child or a family who may not have needed our services today might find themselves in a critical need of those services tomorrow. And so continuing to reach out and to check in and to be available, understanding that things are changing rapidly, and we can be a responsive, we can engage in responsive efforts to help meet the needs of the kids and families in our communities.
Great, thank you. And so, Libby, I want to turn back to you and ask you that as a parent, what do you see as some of the most important roles that a school psychologist can support you and other parents, can play supporting you and other parents during the pandemic?
I love what Shawna and Chandrai have been saying about communication being critical. I think, again, all parents are anxious around this experience we're having, but parents of students with disabilities, again, have heightened anxieties, not just about their academic progress, but whatever behaviors going on and any other services they might need. So to make sure, I love the idea of reaching out to those families specifically and saying, hey, we know you're there. We haven't forgotten about you. You know, we'll stay in touch, and giving them whatever help they need with regards to the accommodations they could possibly try at home, academically, behaviorally, et cetera, and encourage them. Be encouraging, remind them that they can do this. A lot of parents, depending on the child's disability, may have already gone through the infants and toddlers program, which was very much a parent educational model. So, you know, remind them that they can do this. There are things they can do at home, and that, you know, we're all learning a lot through going through this process. And adjust the expectations, though. The uncertainty that remains for all of us just adds to the anxiety. So, you know, just taking it one day at a time, but being that liaison is critical. I also really like what Helen said about touching base with the PTA, because I want the school psychologist and the other team members to know that the PTA, depending on how well organized they are, might already be grappling with some of these things too, and making sure that those equity issues are being addressed. I had a meeting with our PTA just this morning talking about those very things, and it would be great to say, oh, well, we spoke to the school psychologist. She's going to be helping us reach out to these families. So do reach out to them too, and any other parent networks that you might have access to or knowledge of, or find out who they are, because they would love to have your support, and you don't have to do it all alone. So, you know, you can work as a team with those parents too. The communication, I think, is critical, and I love the idea of reaching out to them and offering those supports, and letting them that you'll connect with them again through this process. Definitely important. Helping to keep the kids and the families engaged, I think, is something else that people have talked about. So that extra communication from anyone at the school, especially a school psychologist who really understands some of the challenges they might be having with their unique family and children, would be super helpful.
Okay. Well, thank you to all of you. If you'll flip the next slide, please. I think that there's some themes that have kind of arisen out of things that all of you guys have shared, and that's, you know, we want to stay focused on our students and stay focused on our families. You know, this is a time that, you know, open communication and collaboration is always important. It is, you know, it's really critically important right now as we are all trying to grapple with this new reality. School psychologists can reach out to parents and discuss student needs, or even, you know, just reach out and see if there's an unmet need that we're not aware of. But it is critically important that we continue to maintain those lines of communication with our parents and families. Be a resource. You yourself as a school psychologist are an invaluable resource, and we have the ability to help connect parents with other services and information in the community. Again, you know, it's been mentioned a few times, but you know, the PTA has a number of valuable resources, and so does NASP. And I encourage you to share those with your families, share those with your teachers, share those with people in your community, because they address a lot of the issues that we've talked about today. You know, it's really important that we are, again, we're listening and communicating with our families, but also with our colleagues. So again, I'll make another plug for the fact that there's some really great conversation happening on the NASP member exchange right now. And now, again, this is a weird time for us that we are generally collaborating with each other in our schools and, you know, at our team meetings, and we don't get to do that in person right now. So this is a great way to connect you with your colleagues across the country. It's also really important, not only for students and our parents and families, but also for yourself, is to promote a life balance for our families and for you. You know, we need to find what works best for your family between school and work time, and making time to be together as a family and plan fun activities and engaging in some self-care, whatever that is for you, and also allowing for that virtual social time with each other. Again, just because we are physically distant from one another does not mean that we need to be socially distant and socially disconnected. And again, this is a rough time for everybody. So encourage our families, extend everybody a little bit of grace at this time. I think we are all doing the absolute best that we can. And I can't quite remember who mentioned this earlier, but I think for us as educators and as school psychologists, I think we also need to encourage ourselves. We are also doing the absolute best that we can to provide services to families and students at a time that is stressful for everyone and in a situation that none of us have ever really dealt with before. So be that cheerleader for your colleagues and for your families and for the students that you're working with. Be a good consultant. Again, I think this goes back to what we've heard over and over again about the importance of collaboration and communication. And parents might need us now more than they realize, more than they thought they needed us, as they are spending 7 or 8 hours at home with their child, when usually it's the teacher that's spending 7 or 8 hours at home with their child. So they might learn a lot about their students and might want to rely on the school psychologist to help them deal with some challenges that may arise. And Libby mentioned this, and I think school psychologists are excellent at being advocates for kids and their families, and that is also incredibly critical right now because we are not seeing our students every day. We're not seeing our families every day. It was mentioned earlier that there is an equity divide right now that is growing because of this pandemic and the way that we are educating students in this virtual environment. And school psychology, you have a responsibility to advocate for whatever it is that your students need, both when we're physically in the school building, but also during this time. And to both Shawna and Chandrai's point, we are leaders, and this is a time to show our true leadership skills. And I encourage you all to do the best that you can to lead your school communities, to serve them in whatever way is appropriate and is based on what they need right now, and to be that inspiration that this is an unprecedented time and it is a difficult time, but we will all get through it together by working together and collaborating with one another and just collectively meeting the needs of all of our students. So I want to again thank all of you for taking some time out of your busy lives to join us. I want to remind everyone of the NASP resources that we have created. We have a section on our website completely devoted to COVID-19 resources. We have tips for talking to children. I know that's something that came up a couple of times on this call about how do you have some of those difficult conversations with kids. We have a number of other just general resources that would be helpful during this time. One that, quite honestly, I am finding helpful as I navigate having my toddler at home is how to use praise and rewards wisely. Adapt that to the home environment. So I think a lot of these resources, families are really going to find beneficial. And so I encourage you to share these widely with the schools and families that you are working with. And again, as a reminder, forgot about the external resources, sorry. We have been vetting a lot of resources. I know there are a number of groups putting out all kinds of resources to help schools and families and individuals deal with the fallout from COVID-19. All of the resources that are on this particular slide that you're looking at have been vetted by NASP staff and leaders. So we feel pretty confident that the recommendations in there are backed by evidence, and that we highly recommend these as credible resources for you to use yourself and to share with your families. And then lastly, again, just as a reminder, we will be starting a discussion thread in the NASP member exchange about this webinar. So it's an excellent opportunity for you to share what you're doing to engage and support our parents and families during this time, and also to problem solve and get ideas from other folks around the country who are doing the same thing as you do and just doing the best they can to support everyone. So again, thank you for joining us. Thank you to our expert panel for being with us today, and we hope that you have found this webinar helpful to guide your work as you do the best that you can to support our families.